So we are looking today at primary sources and secondary sources and how they can tell us about events in history through point of views from eyewitnesses and non-witnesses. So basically looking at history through different views from people who were there and people who weren't actually there. When you are looking at a particular topic or a subject, you are using sources to tell you about that information. Probably the most widely used source to understand history is those primary sources. Primary sources are the original records of a specific time in history. So when you're looking at a primary source, you're getting information from people who were actually there, from those first-hand accounts. Some really good examples of primary sources are portraits, historical documents. So those are those documents that were written during that time period, signed, dated, all of those great documents, contracts, music, speeches, newspaper articles, and my favorite is photographs. I think photographs and pictures can tell really cool stories about people just by seeing their faces. You can see expressions and you can kind of get an idea of what it was like to live during those times. So I think photographs are wonderful primary sources. Some primary sources used to talk about Ellis Island. We have 3 pictures here. The first one, you'll see a lot of people in a big room. It seems very crowded. This is the registry room in the main immigration building in 1906. So this shows you a picture of what was going on for those immigrants that had just arrived at Ellis Island. The second picture, the one in the middle, you'll see a nurse in her white uniform giving a bath to a child. This was most likely for sanitation purposes during that registration check-in process. In the final photo, you'll see a man. He is from Poland and he is carrying his suitcase. He has just arrived at Ellis Island. This picture gives us a really cool perspective because that trunk that he is carrying is probably the only thing that he has to carry all of his possessions and everything he owns to a new world. That kind of gives us a sense that how much of a risk it was to move to a new country and to kind of start your life over in a new world. Secondary sources, they are written much longer after an event has occurred. These are people who were not there, they did not experience it, but they are sharing it with other people. Oftentimes they will use those firsthand primary sources as their resource, but oftentimes you'll find more of their opinion or their argument, a little bit more of their voice about an event that has happened. Some secondary sources you will see being used today, especially in classrooms, are those encyclopedias. Online encyclopedias are fabulous. You can search so many different things for information. Textbooks, all of those history books that we have, those are those secondary sources. And biographies. These are written about people who lived during those certain time periods, not to be confused with autobiographies, which are actually written by those people in their life, so that would be more of a primary source. This article here is a link to read an article that was written much long after Ellis Island had occurred during the biggest immigrant time. This kind of gives us more of a opinion and bias argument about what it was like really to be an immigrant during those times. So when we are looking at primary sources and secondary sources, they're often called first and second-hand accounts. So if it's a primary source that has been written or spoken, it is often called a first-hand account. This simply meaning that the person that is telling you about this experienced it firsthand. So they were the ones that knew exactly what was going on, what was happening. For example, you'll see a trip on the Mayflower you'll see it written in that first person. I was so happy when we finally arrived. Our new home held so much promise. So first person, firsthand, primary source. Secondary sources are often referred to as secondhand accounts. A secondhand account describes a person, event, or moment in time from the point of view of someone who was not actually there. A secondhand account is typically based on firsthand accounts for that information. So if you're going to share some information about something, you're going to want to get some really good primary sources to give you lots of evidence and examples to help explain it better to other people. So you'll see where you see the word pilgrims being used. This is a third person point of view. So this is a really cute scenario in action to tell you how first-hand and second accounts occur. So you'll see we have this first scenario where Jillian sees a baby penguin born at the zoo. So she's so excited, she watched it happen. What a cool moment. So because she's so excited, she tells her friend Zach about what she saw. So she's giving a first-hand account of the penguin's birth. She was there, she experienced it, she knows the most about it. Well, Zach thinks it's really cool, so he tells about the penguin being born, even though he didn't actually see it. So this is a second-hand account of the penguin's birth. Notice that he used the information that was given to him by Jillian to adequately tell that story. And lastly, I hope you're not confused, and I hope you have a better understanding of primary sources and secondary sources. But if it's a primary source, it's an original record of a person's life and event, so it's a first-hand account, okay? That first person point of view. Then you have secondary sources. This tells about a person's life or an event that's from a time much later on. This is second-hand account. Good way to remember that, secondary, second-hand. So I hope you are much more clear on primary sources versus secondary sources.